Clever cooking tricks only church ladies knew have a way of sticking in your memory even if we forgot them. These tricks turned simple suppers into feasts that filled tables after Sunday service. What else vanished when their wisdom quietly faded away? Gelatin whipped desserts were one of those clever inventions that took something simple and made it feel like a treat you could be proud to serve at a church potluck. By folding whipped evaporated milk into gelatin, church ladies transformed a basic box of flavored powder into something airy and mousse-like. It was light, colorful, and just sweet enough to feel like dessert without being too heavy. This trick was especially popular because evaporated milk was cheaper and lasted longer on pantry shelves than cream. It was also easier to find during times when fresh dairy was not always available. Families loved how the mixture set into a fluffy texture that felt luxurious, even though it was made from very humble ingredients. At socials, these dishes often arrived in bright pastel shades that lit up the serving table. Kids thought they were getting a fancy pudding, while adults appreciated how economical the recipe was. It was the kind of clever little trick that stretched ingredients and made people smile. The fact that it took almost no time to prepare only added to its appeal. Looking back, it was not just dessert, but a symbol of creativity in community kitchens. Sun tea in glass jars was the definition of resourcefulness because it took nothing more than water, tea bags, and the sun to create a refreshing drink that could serve a whole gathering. Church ladies knew that setting a large glass jar out on the porch or window ledge was the easiest way to brew tea without having to boil a kettle for hours. The slow steeping in sunlight gave the tea a smoother flavor that people swore was better than stovetop brewing. It was also free, which meant it did not add strain to household budgets. Once brewed, it was poured into pitchers, sweetened to taste, and served over ice at socials and dinners. Many ladies flavored it with fresh lemon slices or sprigs of mint, turning it into something special without extra cost. On hot days, a jug of sun tea sitting on a table was as much a part of church events as hymnals and folding chairs. Neighbors loved how they could brew large amounts without lifting more than a jar. It was a simple practice, but it carried with it the spirit of sharing and ease. Sun tea was refreshing, communal, and quietly ingenious. Leftover ham bone soup was a trick that proved nothing in the kitchen ever had to go to waste. Church ladies could take a single leftover ham bone, one that most people might have tossed, and turn it into a pot that could feed an entire family. By simmering the bone for hours, every bit of flavor and richness was drawn into the broth. Beans, lentils, or whatever garden vegetables were available would be added to bulk it up. This not only stretched the ham to its absolute limit, but also made the soup filling and nourishing. Children might not have realized that what they were eating came from scraps, because it always smelled and tasted like a meal prepared with intention. At church suppers, this kind of dish meant one family's leftovers could become another family's shared meal. Ham bone soup often tasted even better the next day, which meant it carried households through more than one dinner. It showed the quiet wisdom of thrift that church ladies held dear. Nothing was wasted, and everything was put toward filling plates. It was a humble recipe that embodied both economy and generosity. Bread and butter pickles were one of those recipes that lived in mason jars stacked in church basements and kitchen cupboards, ready to be pulled out at any gathering. They were sweet, tangy, and crunchy, and they made even the simplest meal feel special. Church ladies often used up garden cucumbers this way, slicing them thin and layering them with onions, sugar, and vinegar. This not only preserved the harvest, but also added variety to meals when fresh produce was scarce. The cleverness was in how long they lasted, because jars could sit sealed for months until they were needed. At potlucks, a plate of bread and butter pickles was never just a side dish. It was a reminder of planning, patience, and care. They dressed up sandwiches, balanced out heavy casseroles, and added brightness to plates full of starches and meats. Kids might sneak them from the jar before supper, while adults savored their nostalgic flavor. Making these pickles was more than just cooking. It was part of the tradition of feeding not just one household, but the entire community. They were sweet in flavor and sweet in meaning. Orange sherbet layered parfaits were the kind of dessert that looked fancier than they really were, which was exactly the point. Church ladies had a way of turning inexpensive sherbet into something that felt like a treat from a restaurant. Layered in tall glasses with whipped cream or fruit, they were colorful and refreshing. The bright orange against white cream made them eye-catching on tables lined with potluck desserts. Sherbet was cheap and kept well in the freezer, making it a practical ingredient for families on tight budgets. By layering it with simple pantry items, women created parfaits that kids loved and adults admired. The trick was all in the presentation because the flavors were simple, but the look was memorable. Parfaits like these were a favorite in summer when something cold and light was most welcome. At gatherings, trays of parfaits could be carried in and set down with pride. They proved that even with limited resources, you could bring joy and elegance to a table. They were clever, thrifty, and full of charm, just like the women who made them. Zucchini bread was born out of necessity when church gardens were overflowing with more zucchini than anyone could eat. Instead of letting them go to waste, church ladies grated the extra squash into batter, turning a humble vegetable into a moist and sweet loaf. With cinnamon, nutmeg, and sugar, the zucchini blended right in, leaving behind only a soft texture and rich flavor. At bake sales, slices of zucchini bread were wrapped and sold quickly, often becoming one of the most popular items. The cleverness was in transforming an unwanted surplus into something comforting and profitable. Families appreciated it too, because kids who might wrinkle their noses at zucchini happily ate it when it was baked into bread. It was also a frugal trick, since it stretched flour, eggs, and sugar into more servings without using extra costly ingredients. For many, the smell of zucchini bread cooling on the counter became tied to church events and fall harvests. It was proof that nothing needed to go to waste if you had creativity in the kitchen. Sweet, simple, and resourceful, zucchini bread became a classic church recipe for good reason. Cracker crust pies were another example of how church ladies could take the simplest ingredients and make them shine. When flour or butter was scarce, they crushed saltine or graham crackers into fine crumbs and mixed them with sugar and a little fat to create pie shells. This meant no rolling pins, no dough failures, and no wasted ingredients. The crusts held firm enough to support creamy fillings like chocolate pudding or lemon custard. At potlucks, a cracker crust pie was a crowd pleaser because it tasted indulgent while still being practical. It was an affordable way to make dessert without relying on expensive ingredients that were not always on hand. The genius of it was how flexible the crust was, adapting to both sweet and tart fillings. Many women passed the trick along in church cookbooks, keeping it alive for new generations. It was not just a substitution, but a whole new tradition that carried its own charm. The simplicity of cracker crust pies is why they still appear in nostalgic kitchens today. They remind us that cleverness often comes from making do with what you have. Coffee can ice cream was as much about the fun as it was about the dessert itself. At church picnics, children and adults would roll sealed coffee cans filled with cream, sugar, and flavoring back and forth across the grass until the mixture froze. It was simple science and community entertainment rolled into one. This trick did not require an ice cream machine or electricity, which made it perfect for outdoor events. Everyone got to participate, laughing as they pushed and shook the cans. When the lids were finally pried off, the reward was a sweet homemade ice cream that tasted better for all the effort behind it. Flavors could be as simple as vanilla or as playful as chocolate chips tossed in at the end. Church ladies loved how it brought people together because the process was just as important as the final dish. It turned dessert into an activity which made it unforgettable for the children who grew up with it. Looking back, coffee can ice cream was not just about thrift, but about joy. It was a perfect picture of community in action. Homemade mayonnaise was one of those tricks that made church ladies feel like magicians in the kitchen. Before jars of mayonnaise were widely available, women learned to whisk oil and egg yolks together until they became a smooth, creamy spread. It was not easy because the mixture could break if handled too roughly, but when it worked, it felt like an accomplishment. Homemade mayonnaise was used in sandwiches, potato salads, and vegetable spreads bringing a fresh richness that people remembered fondly. It was also far cheaper than buying prepared versions, which made it a smart choice for large families or community meals. Church ladies often passed down tips on how to get the texture right, and recipes appeared in local cookbooks to guide beginners. The flavor was sharper and fresher than store-bought, which gave simple dishes an extra kick. At potlucks, someone always had a mayonnaise-based salad that was proudly made from scratch. It was another reminder that thrift and taste did not have to be separate. Making something out of simple pantry items and skill was a badge of honor. It was clever, frugal, and satisfying. Potato donuts might sound strange today, but in thrifty kitchens of the past, they were a clever way to stretch ingredients and make a treat feel more filling. Leftover mashed potatoes or grated boiled potatoes were mixed right into the dough, giving the donuts a soft, moist texture that regular flour alone could not match. A splash of milk, a spoonful of sugar, and a dash of nutmeg or cinnamon turned the plain mixture into something that felt special. Once fried, the outside crisped up golden, while the inside stayed tender and just slightly chewy. Sometimes they were dusted with powdered sugar or rolled in cinnamon sugar, and sometimes they were enjoyed plain with a hot cup of coffee. Families swore by them as a way to avoid waste, and children loved the novelty of a donut that tasted a little different. Potato donuts proved resourcefulness could turn scraps into a sweet indulgence. Oatmeal meatloaf filler was one of the thriftiest tricks church ladies ever leaned on, and it made perfect sense for families watching every penny. Instead of using up all the ground beef at once, rolled oats were mixed in to bulk out the loaf. The oats absorbed the meat's juices, stretching flavor while keeping the texture moist. It was a way to turn a pound of beef into a meal that could feed far more than it should have. For families with hungry children and guests at the table, this meant fewer empty stomachs and less money spent at the butcher. The oats themselves were cheap, easy to store, and endlessly versatile, making them a staple in every pantry. At church suppers, oatmeal-filled meatloaf was quietly common, though no one called attention to it. What mattered was that everyone got a fair slice. For many, it tasted just as hearty as the all-meat version, and the trick became part of the recipe handed down. What began as a way to survive hardship turned into a tradition of clever thrift. It was not just about saving meat, but about feeding people with dignity and ingenuity. Cucumber vinegar soaks were a quick way to brighten the table when fresh vegetables were hard to come by. Church ladies sliced cucumbers thin, tossed them into vinegar and sugar, and left them to chill. After just a short soak, the cucumbers took on a crisp, tangy flavor that worked perfectly alongside heavy casseroles or fried meats. The sharpness of the vinegar balanced out starchy or greasy dishes, making meals feel lighter and fresher. During summer potlucks, bowls of these cucumbers were always emptied fast because they were refreshing and simple. It was an inexpensive side that felt new every time, no matter how often it appeared. The trick was that the vinegar kept the cucumbers firm and flavorful, so they could be made ahead without going limp. Families often passed around jars of these during hot months, and many recipes appeared in community cookbooks. Kids grew up expecting that every picnic table would have a plate of them. They were not just salad, but a cooling relief in the middle of sweltering afternoons. It was proof that even the simplest tricks could feel like a luxury when done with care. Cornflake-topped casseroles were the crunchy secret to making church suppers feel just a little more exciting. Instead of breadcrumbs, which were not always available or affordable, women crushed cornflakes and sprinkled them over the top of creamy dishes. The flakes baked into a golden crust that added texture and flavor. It was a clever way to use a cereal that was already in most kitchens, turning breakfast into a topping. At potlucks, casseroles with that golden crunch always stood out on the table, drawing hands before the plain versions. Whether it was potatoes, green beans, or noodles, cornflakes added that extra layer of satisfaction. The idea spread fast through church cookbooks, and soon nearly every family had their own spin on it. It made sense because it saved money, reduced waste, and delivered results people loved. The topping was also fun for children to help make, crushing the cereal into crumbs before baking. Over time, cornflake casseroles became a defining dish of community meals, carrying with them the spirit of sharing. They were simple, affordable, and unforgettable, just like the gatherings where they were served. Homemade pudding mix jars were a quiet kind of genius, a way to make dessert on demand without buying packaged brands. Church ladies would blend sugar, cornstarch, cocoa, and powdered milk into neat jars or tins, ready to be cooked with water or fresh milk when needed. This meant families could whip up a sweet treat in minutes without running to the store. It was thrifty because the bulk ingredients cost less than pre-made mixes, and it was satisfying because the flavors were richer. Vanilla and chocolate were the most common, but there were endless variations depending on what was on hand. These jars lined cupboards and were shared as gifts at church events, wrapped in cloth with recipes tied on. The idea was both practical and personal, making desserts feel homemade even when the steps were simple. At potlucks, puddings made from these mixes often appeared in pies or parfaits, and no one could tell they came from a jarred shortcut. It was about preparing ahead of time, making sure sweetness was always within reach. Clever, economical, and heartfelt, these mixes became a tradition of love as much as thrift. Applesauce as an oil substitute was one of the smartest baking swaps passed down by church ladies, and it still works today. When oil was too expensive or hard to find, women stirred applesauce into cakes, muffins, or quick breads. The result was a moist crumb and a light sweetness that made every slice taste richer. It was a brilliant solution because apples were plentiful and easy to preserve in jars. Families with apple trees especially relied on this trick, turning harvests into year-round supplies for baking. The swap not only stretched ingredients, but also made recipes feel healthier at a time when nutrition was on everyone's mind. Cakes made this way often carried a subtle fruitiness that made them stand out from heavier versions. Bake sales and potlucks saw many applesauce cakes, their recipes proudly shared between friends. This clever trick also meant that a family could enjoy dessert even when oil rations were low. It was resourcefulness at its best, proving that flavor and thrift could live hand in hand. With each slice, people tasted both ingenuity and comfort, a perfect reflection of church kitchen wisdom. Soup mix seasoned dips were a staple of church basement gatherings, where snacks needed to be quick, cheap, and plentiful. The classic version used onion soup mix stirred into sour cream, creating a dip that tasted far fancier than its humble origins. This little packet transformed plain dairy into something flavorful and addictive, perfect for chips, crackers, or cut vegetables. It was the kind of recipe that could be made in 5 minutes yet always left people asking for seconds. Church ladies loved it because it required no cooking and could be prepared hours before an event. At socials, the dip bowl was always surrounded by a crowd, and many remember it as a symbol of fellowship as much as food. The saltiness and savory flavor paired well with nearly everything, making it the go-to choice for snack tables. Even today, people who grew up with these dips still remember their taste with fondness. It was clever, quick, and communal, a combination that defined the best kind of church cooking. The soup mix dip may have started as a trick, but it became an iconic part of gatherings everywhere. Bologna salad spread was the definition of turning scraps into something special. Church ladies would grind bologna with pickles and mayonnaise, mixing it into a creamy, tangy spread that could be slathered onto white bread. It was cheap, quick, and filling, making it perfect for lunches and socials. What might have been dismissed as a lowly meat became the star of the table when served this way. The spread had a zesty kick that paired well with crackers too, making it a versatile dish for gatherings. Families appreciated it because it stretched a small amount of meat into sandwiches for a whole group. At church events, trays of bologna sandwiches wrapped in wax paper were often passed around, vanishing quickly. Children especially loved them, not knowing the spread was born from thrift. It became part of community cookbooks and was remembered fondly as a taste of simpler times. Bologna salad spread proved that resourcefulness and flavor could go hand in hand. It was not about luxury, but about making the most of what you had and sharing it generously. Corncob jelly was one of those recipes that proved nothing had to go to waste. After the kernels were cut off, Church ladies would boil the cobs to extract every bit of flavor, then add sugar and pectin to make a golden, sweet jelly. The result was surprisingly delicate, with a honey-like taste that spread beautifully on bread or biscuits. It turned what many would throw away into something cherished. Families loved it because it felt like a hidden treasure created from scraps and ingenuity. Jars of corn cob jelly often appeared at church fundraisers or as gifts, their golden color catching the light on pantry shelves. The recipe spread quickly through communities because it embodied the thrifty spirit of the times. It was not just about food, but about honoring every resource. The cleverness lay in seeing sweetness where others saw waste. Corn cob jelly became a reminder that church kitchens were places of both practicality and imagination. It was a humble but meaningful symbol of how much could be done with so little. Canned milk frosting was a budget-friendly way to make desserts feel indulgent without using expensive cream. By whipping evaporated milk with sugar and flavorings, church ladies created a smooth, fluffy icing that paired perfectly with cakes or cookies. It was cheaper, easier to store, and still had the richness people craved. The trick meant even families with limited access to dairy could enjoy frosted treats. At bake sales, cakes topped with this kind of icing sold quickly because they looked just as beautiful as any bakery creation. The flavor was subtly caramelized, which made it stand out from regular buttercream. Children loved it because it was sweet and soft, while adults admired the thrift behind it. Community cookbooks often included this recipe, passing it from one household to another. It showed that indulgence did not always need expensive ingredients, just clever thinking. Frosting made this way was not only practical, but also memorable, leaving behind a taste tied to church gatherings. It was a simple solution that brought sweetness to tables everywhere. Dandelion green salad was once a common dish that many families relied on when money was tight or gardens were bare. The tender leaves were gathered from yards or fields in early spring when they were still young and mild in flavor. Mixed with a splash of vinegar, a drizzle of oil, or sometimes even bacon drippings, the salad had a tangy bite that balanced heavier meals. Some cooks softened the greens with a quick sauté before tossing them, while others preferred the raw crunch paired with hard-boiled eggs or crumbled cheese. Children often complained about the bitterness, but thrifty parents knew these wild greens provided valuable vitamins after a long winter of preserved foods. The dish was both frugal and fresh, a reminder that nourishment could be found in the simplest places if you were willing to look. Dandelion green salad carried the spirit of making do with what the earth freely gave. Cinnamon sugar pie crust twists were one of those clever snacks that made sure nothing ever went to waste in a church kitchen. When there was leftover pie dough from baking, it was rolled out, brushed with a little butter, and sprinkled with sugar and cinnamon before being cut into strips and baked until crisp. What came out of the oven were sweet, flaky little cookies that filled the kitchen with the smell of spice. They were perfect for children who came running in after service, eager for a bite of something warm. These twists were quick to make, cost nothing extra, and gave a sense of thriftiness that still felt indulgent. At church socials, trays of them would disappear in minutes because they were easy to grab and eat by hand. Many families passed down this trick as part of their pie baking routine, treating it as the baker's reward for making dessert. They were a small joy born from careful use of every scrap, and their memory lingers in the kitchens where nothing was ever wasted. Homemade pecan pralines were a southern treasure that church ladies proudly brought to gatherings, proving how far sugar and nuts could stretch when mixed with skill. They boiled sugar, butter, and cream until it thickened, then stirred in pecans and spooned the mixture onto wax paper to cool. The result was a glossy, sweet candy with a nutty crunch that tasted like pure indulgence. Pralines were often wrapped in wax paper and handed out at bake sales or shared at holidays, becoming symbols of generosity as much as flavor. The cleverness was that a handful of pecans, which many families harvested from their own trees, could be turned into dozens of treats. They carried with them the flavor of southern kitchens but traveled easily to any church table across the country. Making pralines was not just about candy, but about patience and tradition, because the timing had to be just right. They were rich, comforting, and unforgettable. The kind of treat that defined community spirit through sweetness. Pressure-cooked chicken was a revelation before slow cookers became the standard in American homes, and church ladies embraced it with open arms. Using stovetop pressure cookers, they could turn tough or inexpensive cuts of poultry into tender, juicy meals in a fraction of the time it normally took. This was a godsend for busy families and for women preparing large meals for church suppers, because it saved both hours and money. Instead of roasting for long stretches, chicken could be cooked quickly, with the pressure sealing in flavor. The meat was moist, the broth rich, and the process efficient enough to keep up with the pace of community gatherings. Recipes for pressure-cooked chicken often appeared in church cookbooks, teaching new cooks how to master the technique. For families on tight budgets, this trick meant they could make poultry stretch further without losing quality. It was clever, practical, and delicious, the kind of trick that showed church ladies always knew how to work smarter in the kitchen. Eggless, milkless, butterless cake was a recipe born of wartime shortages that never really disappeared from church kitchens because it was clever enough to stand on its own. Known sometimes as Wacky cake, it relied on vinegar, oil, and baking soda to create lift, with cocoa or spices for flavor. The absence of traditional ingredients made it perfect for times of rationing, but the result was still moist, tender, and satisfying. Church ladies loved it because it could be baked with pantry staples, even when dairy and eggs were scarce or too expensive. It became a dependable cake for bake sales, funerals, and family dinners, often topped with a simple frosting made from powdered sugar and water. What started as a necessity evolved into a tradition, with many families holding on to the recipe even when ingredients were plentiful again. The cake carried with it the memory of resourcefulness, proving that sweetness could be found even in lean times. It was humble, thrifty, and surprisingly delicious, a reminder that cleverness often came from constraint. Homemade grape Kool-Aid sherbet was one of those tricks that turned a simple drink mix into a frozen delight for children's socials. Church ladies mixed powdered Kool-Aid with sugar, water, and a little milk, then froze it into a sherbet that looked bright, cheerful, and fun. It cost very little to make, but felt like a special treat, especially in the heat of summer. Kids loved the vivid purple color and tangy sweetness, while parents appreciated that it could be made in large batches with minimal effort. At picnics or Sunday school gatherings, tubs of this sherbet were scooped into paper cups, leaving sticky smiles everywhere. It was a clever way to turn an ordinary drink into something memorable, stretching one packet of mix into enough dessert for dozens. The trick also reflected the resourceful spirit of the times, proving that fun did not require fancy ingredients. Homemade grape sherbet became a simple joy tied to fellowship, childhood, and the warm memory of church community. Pickled okra was one of those clever preserving tricks that kept garden bounty on the table long after summer ended. Church ladies would fill jars with okra pods, vinegar, garlic, and spices, sealing them up to store for the months ahead. The brine softened the vegetable just enough while keeping its crunch, creating a tangy, flavorful side that paired well with heavy meals. At potlucks, a jar of pickled okra could cut through the richness of casseroles and meats, adding variety and brightness. Families who grew okra in backyard gardens relied on this method to prevent waste, turning surplus harvests into something special. It was also a clever way to bring color and texture to cold weather meals when fresh vegetables were harder to find. The jars themselves lined pantry shelves like jewels, each one a testament to planning and thrift. Pickled okra was more than food. It was a sign of care, ensuring nothing went to waste and every meal had balance. Rolled jam pinwheels were a sweet answer to leftover pie dough, making sure no scrap went unused in church kitchens. Instead of tossing out the extra trimmings, women rolled the dough flat, spread it with jam or jelly, sprinkled a little sugar, and baked it into spiraled cookies. The result was crisp on the outside, gooey in the center, and irresistible to anyone nearby. These little pinwheels often became a reward for children hovering around the kitchen, eager for something warm. At church events, trays of them were passed around alongside coffee, proving that even scraps could become a memorable treat. They carried with them the lesson that nothing in the kitchen should be wasted, no matter how small. Each batch was different depending on the flavor of jam on hand, which gave them a charming variety. Rolled jam pinwheels were thrift, tradition, and comfort rolled into one, a little bite of sweetness that showed off everyday cleverness. Rice custard pudding was the perfect example of transforming leftovers into something entirely new. Instead of tossing out the rice from dinner, church ladies combined it with eggs, milk, sugar, and spices to create a creamy dessert that could feed a family. Baked until golden on top, the pudding was sweet, filling, and surprisingly elegant for such humble beginnings. At church suppers, it was served warm with a sprinkle of nutmeg or cinnamon, giving it a homely but satisfying touch. This trick kept food waste at a minimum and turned ordinary staples into special treats. Families appreciated that it made use of every grain, and children loved the soft, custard-like texture. The pudding carried with it a sense of comfort and thrift, becoming a regular in church cookbooks and family recipe boxes. It was a dish that looked backward to tradition while still feeling fresh at every table. Rice custard pudding was proof that with just a little imagination, yesterday's leftovers could be today's dessert. Molasses peanut brittle was a fundraiser favorite, born from the need to create sweets with inexpensive ingredients. Church ladies boiled molasses until thick, stirred in roasted peanuts, and spread the mixture onto pans to harden. The result was a glossy, dark candy that snapped with a satisfying crunch. Unlike fancy chocolates, brittle could be made in large batches with very little cost, making it ideal for bake sales or holiday bazaars. Wrapped in wax paper and tied with ribbon, it became a gift as well as a treat, carrying with it the flavor of old-fashioned kitchens. The molasses gave it a rich, almost smoky sweetness that paired perfectly with the earthy peanuts. It was a candy that felt sturdy, lasting long enough to be enjoyed over weeks. For communities raising money, peanut brittle was as much a tradition as the event itself. It was a clever, practical sweet that balanced thrift with indulgence, proving that simple ingredients could still create joy. Cheese ball with nuts was the crown jewel of many church parties, a dish that felt festive while still being affordable. Cream cheese was blended with herbs, spices, or even bits of dried fruit, then rolled into a ball and covered in chopped nuts. It looked impressive on the table, served with crackers or slices of bread, but was remarkably simple to prepare. The cheese ball could be made ahead of time, which freed women to focus on other dishes during busy events. Its creamy interior and crunchy exterior made it a crowd favorite, disappearing quickly no matter how large the portion. For potlucks, it was a centerpiece that proved presentation did not need to be costly. Families often had their own versions, with secret seasoning mixes that gave theirs a unique flavor. Wrapped and gifted, cheese balls also served as tokens of kindness during holidays. It was clever, communal, and celebratory, a recipe that showed church ladies knew how to make ordinary ingredients feel extraordinary. Cornbread dressing was a savory and flavorful side dish cherished at many 1950s church potlucks. Made by combining crumbled cornbread with sautéed onions, celery, herbs, and often broth or eggs, this dressing was baked to golden perfection. It was commonly served alongside roasted meats and poultry, providing a comforting, hearty accompaniment. The recipe made use of simple ingredients that were affordable and easy to prepare in large quantities, which was important for feeding crowds at community gatherings. Cornbread dressing reflected the Southern influence in many American kitchens, where cornbread was a staple. The dish's moist texture and rich herbaceous flavor made it a favorite among all ages. It also embodied the tradition of sharing home-cooked dishes that reminded families of holidays and Sunday dinners. This dressing was often passed down through generations, representing not just food but family history and church fellowship. Many still remember its distinct aroma and the way it brought warmth and fullness to the potluck table. Macaroni salad with pickles and Miracle Whip is a dish that defined many church picnics and potlucks in the 20th century. The combination of elbow macaroni, sweet pickles, and the tangy zip of Miracle Whip dressing made this dish a beloved classic. It was the perfect side to complement the heavier casseroles and meats often found at these gatherings. The sweet pickles added a burst of flavor that balanced the creamy dressing. while the macaroni provided that comforting base that everyone loved. Each bite of this macaroni salad is a mix of textures and flavors, from the crunch of the pickles to the smooth creaminess of the dressing. Whether served as a side or even as a standalone dish, macaroni salad with pickles and Miracle Whip was a crowd pleaser. But if you think this tangy delight was the highlight, wait until you experience the cool, sweet dish that followed this trend, coming up next. Few aromas could fill a church kitchen quite like freshly baked dinner rolls. Soft, buttery, and served warm, these rolls were a symbol of homemade care and hospitality. Devotion dinner rolls were the kind of recipe passed down through families, often scrawled on flour-dusted recipe cards and perfected over decades of Sunday suppers and holiday feasts. Homemade bread has deep roots in American culinary history, long before mass-produced loaves became the norm. In the 1970s, scratch-made dinner rolls still held their place on church tables, reflecting a time when baking bread was both an act of love and a nod to tradition. With simple, affordable ingredients like flour, yeast, and butter, these rolls were versatile enough to accompany anything from soups to pot roast, making them a must-have at potlucks. So why are they now more a memory than a staple? Blame the rise of convenience foods. The introduction of prepackaged rolls and frozen bread dough offered busy cooks a shortcut that didn't involve kneading or proofing. And while nothing quite compares to the taste of homemade, time-consuming recipes often took a backseat as modern life sped up. Taco salad cups were a really fun, convenient, and classic new take on the otherwise timeless taco salad. You took all the best parts of that dish and served it in more or less the same way, except this time around, you threw it in taco shell cups. All you had to do then was layer some flavors and get your guacamole and cheese going. This was a party dish in every sense of the word. Bringing an entire horde of these was easy for just about anyone with a lot of trust in their finger strength or a car with some backseat space. It was one of the most convenient parts of Tex-Mex culture too, since taco salads began showing up in Tex-Mex restaurants right after the World War. How does that make it convenient? Well, put yourself in their shoes. Sure, the war ended and the recession became yesterday's news, but the ripples they sent through the economy meant that a lot of people were still desperately trying to find their footing. Affordable, group-friendly food like this meant that people could show up to potlucks with something worth bringing that was also affordable, or they could just make a big batch on their own. In the days of church picnics, where hearty casseroles and fried chicken often took center stage, divine dill cucumber salad offered a light, refreshing contrast. This dish, made with thinly sliced cucumbers coated in a tangy blend of vinegar, sour cream, and fresh dill, was a staple in the mid-20th century. It reflected a shift toward incorporating fresh produce into meals, particularly during the warmer months when cucumbers were plentiful in backyard gardens. Practicality was one of its strongest virtues. The ingredients were inexpensive and easy to find, and the dish required no cooking, making it a breeze to prepare for a crowd. It also held up well in the heat, a critical feature for outdoor gatherings. Its versatility meant it could be served as a side dish, a palate cleanser, or even as part of a sandwich filling. Despite its appeal, this crisp and creamy salad eventually fell out of favor. As more elaborate salads and pre-packaged options gained popularity, simpler recipes like this one began to feel outdated. Additionally, the growing focus on global cuisine brought bolder flavors to the forefront, leaving dill cucumber salad in the shadows. Pinwheel sandwiches are a versatile little dish. They work as a one-on-one meal with a friend, they work at parties and even at potlucks. It's because of their compact little size and how easy they are to eat that lots of people love them. Pinwheel sandwiches don't really have any kind of specific historical origin that I can rant about here, as convenient as that would be, but what they do have is a lot of bandwagoning. By that, I mean these things hopped on the finger food and wraps trend that was taking over pretty much all of the latter half of the 20th century. They hopped on pretty fast too, since they became one of the most popular things to eat in pretty much around a decade's time. It was a fun way to enjoy a sandwich, and it was really easy to carry around with you. People would honestly even take leftover pinwheel sandwiches to work because of that, and that only helped their PR get better and better. Was it a traditional sandwich as we had grown up with? Not at all. Was it still incredibly fun? Definitely. These sandwiches had a lot of room for creativity because you could fill them up with literally anything. Allergies? You can choose what to put in. Like it spicier? Go all in on the chilies? Vegan? You can make sure not even a speck of meat goes in there. All of this, while still being an amazing fit for big groups and looking pretty at the same time, makes this a dish worth remembering. In the 1970s, dips reigned supreme at church potlucks and family gatherings, and few were as delightfully quirky as dill pickle dip. A creamy blend of sour cream, cream cheese, and finely chopped dill pickles, this tangy appetizer offered bold flavor with minimal effort. Whether served with crackers, chips, or vegetable sticks, it was an unexpected crowd pleaser that stood out among more traditional offerings. This dish emerged during an era when convenience and creativity defined home cooking. Dill pickles had been a staple in American pantries since the early 20th century, and combining them with creamy bases like sour cream or cream cheese was an innovative way to transform basic ingredients into something new. It was practical too, easy to whip up, affordable, and well-suited for large gatherings. So, what happened to this retro favorite? As culinary trends evolved, so did dips. Flashier, more complex recipes featuring exotic ingredients like artichokes and sun-dried tomatoes became the new standard, leaving humble dill pickle dip behind. And for those with pickier palates, the sharp, briny flavor wasn't always a hit. Dill pickle dip evokes nostalgia for an era when recipes were shared on index cards, and the measure of a good potluck dish was how quickly it disappeared. Molasses stack cake is one of those desserts that's both simple and deeply nostalgic, especially in the Southern church tradition. This cake is made with layers of spiced molasses-flavored cake, stacked high and often filled with a sweet apple butter or fruit preserves. The deep, rich flavor of molasses shines through, creating a cake that's perfect for any occasion, but especially for gatherings where people appreciate homemade, heartfelt dishes. Each layer is tender, yet sturdy enough to hold the sweet filling in place, making it a treat that's both satisfying and easy to eat. The flavor of molasses adds a warmth and depth that you don't get from typical sweet cakes, and the texture is moist without being overly heavy. Often made for church picnics, weddings, or holiday dinners, this cake has a way of bringing everyone together over a slice. And while this molasses cake might be a perfect ending to any meal, there's one more classic dessert on the way that offers a touch of sweetness and nostalgia. Stay tuned. Raisin and nut salad was a sweet and textured dish that balanced dried fruits with crunchy nuts, typically served cold at 1950s potlucks. This salad often included raisins, chopped walnuts or pecans, and sometimes shredded celery or apples, all tossed in a light mayonnaise or cream-based dressing. The combination of chewy raisins and crunchy nuts created an appealing contrast that was both satisfying and refreshing. It was an affordable and easy-to-make side dish that added a touch of sweetness to the potluck table without overpowering other flavors. The salad's cool temperature and rich texture made it a welcome complement to hot casseroles and savory mains. Families often passed down their own recipes with small variations, such as the addition of pineapple or marshmallows. This dish captured the nostalgic comfort of mid-century American cooking, where mixing fruits and nuts into salads was a popular way to add variety and nutrition. It remains a fondly remembered part of church potluck history for many. Revival punch is a drink that brings a bit of nostalgia to any gathering, and it has a special place in church kitchens and family parties. This classic punch is made with just two ingredients, sherbet and ginger ale. But somehow, this simple combination creates a magical, bubbly, and creamy concoction that everyone loves. The sherbet, usually orange or lime, melts into the ginger ale, creating a frothy, smooth texture that's refreshingly sweet with a little zing from the ginger ale. This drink was often served at church socials, holiday parties, and family gatherings, offering a cool, fizzy treat that's perfect for large crowds. The sweetness of the sherbet pairs perfectly with the carbonation of the ginger ale, making it a drink that feels both light and indulgent at the same time. Revival punch is not just a drink, but a tradition that has been passed down through generations, providing a fun and festive atmosphere wherever it's served. It's a nostalgic favorite that always brings people back for seconds. If you thought this drink was the perfect refresher, you'll love the next treat. A sweet dessert that's as comforting as it is irresistible. Stay tuned for more delicious nostalgia. Few desserts capture the retro charm of the mid-20th century like the pineapple upside-down cake. Its signature design, caramelized pineapple slices and bright red maraschino cherries embedded in a golden cake, made it as visually striking as it was delicious. Praise pineapple. Upside-down cake was more than just a dessert. It was a conversation piece at church potlucks and community dinners. The dish rose to popularity in the 1920s and 1930s thanks to the invention of canned pineapple by the Hawaiian Pineapple Company. Their marketing campaigns promoted recipes featuring pineapple, and the upside-down cake, with its sweet, sticky topping, became an instant hit. By the 1950s and 60s, it had become a potluck classic, celebrated for its simplicity. Just one pan, and its ability to turn everyday ingredients into a dessert that felt festive. As tastes evolved in the late 20th century, the cake began to lose its luster. The heavy use of canned ingredients and its sugary glaze didn't align with the growing emphasis on fresh, lighter desserts. Additionally, its iconic appearance became a symbol of an earlier era, less appealing to younger bakers seeking more modern flavors and aesthetics. Cheese, sausage, and croissant strata is this really comforting brunch dish that actually works amazingly for potlucks. It works because it's the perfect little starter to bring to a party. Most people already know who's going to be bringing what, and there are designated people who bring the really heavy-hitter dishes. That leaves people who really need to nail the sides, appetizers, and desserts. For them, this dish was literally a no-compromise sort of thing. It was absolutely impossible to have a potluck without somebody bringing over a croissant strata, especially if you lived in the openly French neighborhoods. Sorry, by that I mean the ones who would cook nothing else but French food. Strata has lots of layers, especially in Italy, where they take the attention to detail super seriously. Traditional strata recipes make use of sliced bread, baguettes, croissants, and all kinds of other things. This dish was experimented with a lot while it was becoming a big thing in America, so you had people all over the country doing their own version of a strata. Lots of people played around with the kinds of cheeses you could use, or they would switch out the sausages for some other meat. Either way, it was a wonderful little bread-based dish to serve as a filler until the next big meal. In the days when church picnics were synonymous with indulgent homemade treats, faithful fried apple rings brought a touch of carnival-style fun to the table. This simple yet delicious dessert featured crisp apple slices, dipped in a light batter, fried until golden, and finished with a dusting of cinnamon sugar. The result was a warm, sweet, and slightly tangy bite that captured the essence of autumn, no matter the season. The practicality of this recipe made it a frequent guest at gatherings. Apples were affordable, widely available, and easy to work with, while the batter could be whisked together using basic pantry ingredients. Fried apple rings were also incredibly versatile. They worked as a dessert, a snack, or even a breakfast treat alongside coffee, and their individual portions made them ideal for sharing, with no forks or plates required. So, why don't we see these anymore? Frying, once a common cooking method, has fallen out of favor due to health concerns and the labor-intensive nature of the process. Add to that the rise of prepackaged apple snacks and desserts, and these homemade treats began to fade. Pink fluff salad is a dish that never fails to evoke memories of church potlucks, family picnics, and holiday celebrations. It's a dessert disguised as a salad, but don't let that fool you. It's all sweetness and fun. The dish combines Cool Whip, cherry pie filling, crushed pineapple, and marshmallows, creating a fluffy, creamy texture that's as fun to eat as it is to look at. It's a delightful pink color that's as cheerful as it is delicious, and it's the kind of dish you always look forward to at church functions. Despite its sugary nature, pink fluff salad has a certain lightness to it, making it the perfect end to a meal, or even a snack all on its own. It's a nostalgic classic that's been passed down through generations. And speaking of dishes that bring joy to any table, there's one more beloved recipe that pairs perfectly with your next meal. Coming up next, a dish that combines savory with sweet in the most unexpected way. Watergate salad was a sweet and fluffy concoction that quickly gained popularity in the 1950s as a potluck staple. Named after the famous Watergate Hotel, this salad combined pistachio-flavored instant pudding mix, canned pineapple chunks, whipped topping, and miniature marshmallows for a uniquely textured and flavorful dessert. Its bright green color and creamy sweetness made it visually appealing and a favorite among families. Watergate salad was easy to prepare, requiring no baking or cooking, which made it perfect for busy church members contributing to community meals. The salad's balance of fruit and sweet creaminess offered a delightful finish to savory dishes on the table. It also showcased the growing influence of convenience foods and packaged ingredients that defined mid-century American cooking. Many families passed down their versions of the recipe, sometimes adding nuts or coconut for extra texture. The dish became a nostalgic symbol of 1950s social gatherings, evoking memories of shared meals and the simple joys of fellowship. Coconut sheet cake with pecan frosting is one of those desserts that defines indulgence. This cake is soft and fluffy, with the subtle sweetness of coconut permeating every bite. The cake itself is made with coconut milk, which keeps it moist and tender, while shredded coconut adds texture and flavor. The real magic, however, comes from the pecan frosting. Made with butter, sugar, and plenty of chopped pecans, this frosting is rich, nutty, and wonderfully sweet. It's spread generously over the top of the cake, creating a deliciously crunchy contrast to the soft, moist cake below. Coconut sheet cake with pecan frosting is often served at church events, family reunions, and special occasions, where its rich flavor and beautiful texture make it the perfect showstopper. The cake is easy to make in a sheet pan, making it ideal for feeding a crowd, and its flavor is universally loved. Whether it's for a birthday celebration or a holiday gathering, this cake is sure to be a hit. If you think this sweet, nutty dessert is the perfect way to end a meal, wait until you try the next recipe, a treat that combines flavors in a way you never thought possible. Stay tuned for more. During the 1970s, baked chicken dishes were the unsung heroes of potluck dinners, and this one, with its honey, pecan, and mustard glaze, struck the perfect balance between sweet and savory. Holy honey pecan chicken brought a touch of sophistication to the church potluck table, elevating humble chicken into a dish that felt both hearty and refined. The roots of this recipe trace back to Southern cooking traditions, where pecans were abundant and honey was a natural sweetener long before sugar became widespread. By the mid-20th century, recipes like this embraced the availability of affordable chicken cuts and pantry staples like mustard and honey. Chicken was cheap, easy to prepare, and universally loved, while the glaze was a clever way to turn basic ingredients into something special. So, why don't we see it much today? Part of the answer lies in the rise of boneless, skinless chicken breasts and pre-marinated options, which eliminated the need for labor-intensive glazes. Add to that the growing preference for lighter, grilled dishes, and this once popular recipe found itself fading into culinary obscurity. Nacho meatballs don't really have any kind of specific history, but what they do have is an extremely large amount of mass use by the public. Nacho meatballs represent the best of American cooking. Sometimes, you just need to lay down all the fancy stuff and the ricottas and the raviolis and just eat something that's easy and fun. A lot of people criticize American culture and cuisine for going all in on that aspect, and you know what? Fair point. In moderation, though, it just shows you how good convenience food really can be, and especially how versatile. Nacho meatballs relied a lot on the kind of cheese you would serve them with for their flavor, so people were always either switching it up or trying out new cheese blends. You could change the meat too and get an entirely new experience. Turkey meatballs worked a lot differently with nacho and cheese dips than, let's say, sausages or hunter beef. A lot of people would do something fun with it, which is they'd make different kinds of meatballs and dips and serve them as a part of a nacho meatball platter. Pretty fun for a potluck, right? During the mid-20th century, Jell-O desserts were the crown jewels of church picnics and potlucks, and cherished cranberry Jell-O squares were no exception. This layered creation brought together the tartness of cranberry gelatin, the sweetness of crushed pineapple, and the creamy richness of a whipped cream cheese topping. Its vibrant red hue made it visually striking, while the contrasting textures kept guests coming back for seconds. The practicality of this dish was undeniable. Gelatin-based desserts were inexpensive, easy to prepare, and required little more than a refrigerator and some patience. The recipe's versatility added to its appeal. Home cooks could swap in other fruits, experiment with different flavors of Jell-O, or even add chopped nuts for extra crunch. It was a crowd pleaser that could double as a side dish or a dessert, making it an all-star at potlucks. So why did this classic fade away? As tastes shifted toward fresher, less processed ingredients, gelatin dishes began to lose their charm. The rise of lighter, fruit-forward desserts also pushed these nostalgic treats to the sidelines. But for those who remember the wobble of a perfectly set square and the creamy tang of the topping, cherished cranberry Jell-O squares remain a sweet reminder of an era when creativity in the kitchen met the needs of a growing community. Few dishes spark as much curiosity or debate as a gelatin mold. In the 1970s, the Congregation carrot mold combined shredded carrots, crushed pineapple, and orange gelatin into a dish that was both a side and a conversation starter. Sweet, tangy, and slightly crunchy, it blurred the line between salad and dessert, making it a staple at church potlucks where versatility was key. The mid-20th century was the golden age of gelatin-based recipes. With the post-war boom in processed foods, Jell-O became a household name, marketed as the canvas for everything from fruit to vegetables. Carrots and pineapple were a natural pairing, offering a bright color palette and a balance of textures that appealed to adventurous home cooks. The mold's practicality also can't be overlooked. It was easy to make ahead, held its shape on a buffet table, and was affordable for families stretching their budgets. However, as food trends evolved, gelatin molds began to feel outdated. Fresh salads and lighter fare gained popularity, while the sugary sweet combination of carrots and Jell-O started to seem like a culinary relic. For those who remember it, though, this dish evokes a time when creativity reigned supreme and no potluck table was complete without a molded masterpiece. Beef stroganoff with cream of mushroom soup is the dish that gave the classic Russian favorite a distinctly American twist. Instead of delicate beef cuts and fancy sauces, this version relied on hearty ground beef, creamy soup, and simple ingredients that church kitchens could whip up with ease. The cream of mushroom soup served as the base for the sauce, turning what could have been a labor-intensive dish into something fast, flavorful, and family-friendly. It was typically baked in a casserole dish, making it easy to serve a crowd and paired perfectly with egg noodles or rice. While this casserole version might not have been what you'd find in a high-end Russian restaurant, it became an enduring comfort food staple in American church kitchens. If you think this dish hits all the right notes of creamy and savory, wait until you taste the sweet, tangy pie coming up next. It's a Southern classic that's sure to please. Peanut butter salad with shredded carrots was a surprising and uniquely textured dish that found its way onto many church potluck tables in the 1950s. This salad combined the creamy richness of peanut butter with the crunch and natural sweetness of shredded carrots, often mixed with mayonnaise, raisins, or pineapple tidbits to balance the flavors. Served chilled, it offered a cool and satisfying contrast to the warm, savory dishes that dominated the potluck spread. This dish was affordable and easy to prepare, relying on pantry staples that were accessible to most families. Its unusual combination appealed to adventurous palates and reflected the era's experimentation with mixing sweet and savory elements. Peanut butter salad was a conversation starter and a memorable part of many communal meals. It demonstrated how home cooks creatively incorporated new ingredients into traditional social gatherings, making it an enduring part of 1950s church food culture. When it came to feeding a family on a tight budget, casseroles were the backbone of 1970s home cooking, and Hopeful Hot Dog Casserole was one of the era's most resourceful creations. Combining hot dogs, baked beans, and a cornbread topping, it turned simple, inexpensive ingredients into a dish that could feed a crowd with ease. It wasn't fancy, but it was undeniably comforting and a little fun. Hot dogs, introduced to American cuisine in the 19th century, became a kitchen staple by the mid-20th century thanks to their affordability and versatility. Pairing them with baked beans, another budget-friendly favorite, created a savory base with a hint of sweetness. The cornbread topping, inspired by Southern traditions, added texture and warmth, making this casserole feel a little more special than its components might suggest. It was quick to assemble, easy to bake, and hearty enough to fill hungry stomachs after a Sunday service. However, as palates shifted toward fresher, less processed foods, this casserole's reliance on packaged ingredients led to its decline. Hot dogs lost some of their appeal as health trends took hold, and the dish's humble simplicity began to feel dated. Drop your favorite forgotten church trick in the comments, hit like if you'd sneak an extra slice at the potluck, and subscribe before the casserole gets cold.